Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about domains and committing. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how do you find a technical stack you love and more importantly a domain to make a commitment to? Well, it has mostly to do with figuring out what are your goals. That's the basics. Because the key observation that a lot of people fail to make, that I argue for, is that and this is forgivable and it's completely understandable if you're like a junior level or you're a fresh beginner or something like that, you're going to go into the industry, right? Because, I mean, guys, when I first started, I didn't know the first thing about programming, so of course, like for me, who had this idea that I was going to be able to build everything, right? I didn't want to, like when people told me, oh yeah, pick C++ because you really want that due to, like if you want to do games development. And then I felt, yeah, but I don't just want to do games development. And you don't know any, oh, you should pick Python because it's beginner friendly. And then my fear was, okay, that's nice for me now, but can I really build all the things that I want with that programming language? Because I didn't know any better. So when I first started, like I tried a bunch of different languages in different courses, but I sort of settled on Java because everybody was telling me, oh, Java, well, it's used for everything, right? It's used for everything. And to a point that is, true, but it's only much later when I realized that, yes, basically a lot of different languages can do a lot of the things that you want to do. But there's a big difference between what you can technically do with the language and what it's actually used for, like what's common. Because if you're going to make a career out of being a professional software developer, you should know a little bit about the sorts of projects that your languages, or like in my case it's multiple languages, but for you maybe you start out with one. What is like sort of the norm for this language? And whether or not that is something that you want to be spending your time with. Because as an example, if you want to do embedded programming and you take courses in PHP, that's probably not a good match for what you're trying to achieve. And so that's the first thing. You need to ask yourself, what type of development do I want to do? And then you do the second thing. I've preached this 100 times and I'm going to continue preaching it, and that's why you don't get my 5 tips on relevant programming languages to learn to be relevant in X, Y, and Z year, because I always say the same thing. Go to the job posting. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to YouTube. Don't listen to the newsletters. Fuck all of that stuff. Don't listen to it. Go and look at the job posting. There are actual people stating actual languages and tools that they will pay you money if you know how to code in them. That is better than anything anybody on any newsletter will ever be able to give you. Hands down, at least if you ask me, every single time. That's why I'm excluding myself from the recommendation as well, because I have my favorite languages and I have my perspectives and stuff like that. But if you want a job, go and look at the people asking you for those skills and start working on them. And you will find that there is a selection of different languages. And when it comes to domain, I think it's important for you to know that the key observation here is that the software that you write is within a ecosystem of other surrounding tools and technologies and concepts. And in the early days, the domain, if we talk about we're not talking about like a technical domain, like where you're going into something specific or something like that. We're talking about the industry that you're talking about. So when I usually refer to, and well, most people refer to, the domain area of whatever you're doing, that has more to do with the business. And so when I tell someone, for example, that, well, we have software developers here and they don't really have any domain knowledge, that has not to do with the fact that necessarily that they're bad at the coding part. It might just be that they don't really know what business they're doing. Because the thing that you, as a software developer, that's the key observation that I try to drive home to people. You're part of an ecosystem. The system that you are writing is a virtual representation of a company's structure or some type of system. It's a physical system or a system. It can be like a virtual system, of course, as well. But I hope that makes sense. Like when you're creating a web shop, for example, what you're in essence doing is that you are using code to map out the same structure that exists in a retailer's like a place of business. Like if you go into a shop or something like that, you have the same sort of entities and data structures, etc., etc. And that's why you have the programming language, to be able to represent that and to optimize it and do all these sort of things we do with code and so forth, so that you can do it over the internet or virtually or something like that. So you can in some way improve that process, right, with information. And that's the goal. The goal is to be able to do that thing for whatever domain that you are dealing with. If it's games development, or if it's mobile, or if it's web for some corporation or something like that. And so what I usually tell the juniors is that that's not so important. Like it's not important for you to pick, say, an industry, to specialize in finance, unless you really want to go in there, right? Or if it's retailing, or if it's one thing or the other. The main thing is for you to get basic training because of the ecosystem. And the ecosystem, the domain, we need to separate those things. When I say that you don't have domain knowledge, it usually is that you don't know how a specific company works or how the rules work in that specific area, like field of business. So an example would be, I don't have any domain knowledge really about insurance because I've never worked in an insurance company. I don't know how to model a system that would deal with insurance. I know all the coding and I can code as you can expect, right? But I couldn't even begin writing code for insurances because I don't know the rules. How do you model a system you don't really understand? Well, I'll tell you, poorly. That's what you do. Poorly. And usually it's the domain knowledge that is, like, that's always the case. As soon as even when you're a super senior guys, you will always lack domain knowledge unless you take a job that is identical to some other industry that you worked in, or so forth and so forth. But if you lack, say, ecosystem, and there is a bit of ambiguity between domain and ecosystems and stuff like that, that is a much more important topic for you, especially in the beginning. Because as I said, when you pick a stack, you're not just picking a programming language, you're picking a community of learning resources, libraries, platforms, what you can, like the different sort of tooling, and their surrounding tools. Like for us who do web, for example, like as I tell people, this is why it usually takes some time to actually get good at software development, because by the time you've learned your first programming language, you're probably in at least 1 year before you start feeling that you sort of know how to code. And then that's, if it's web, like that's just one part of it. And then you have HTML, CSS, you have containerization, because modern day applications run microservices. What's that about? Networking, due to the fact that you actually need to run something of what is an IP address, how does the TCP protocol work, how does HTTP work, how Git and version control, like repositories, deployment pipelines, merging, and I can just go on, right? They're basically sitting here just listing things that you need to know, and none of those things necessarily has to do with just the code, like the if statements and the for loops and whatever you have, right, or the variables and constants. That's just that's the kernel, that's the core of what you do. But there's an entire onion, like a layering thing that's going on of other stuff, and that's the thing that you're looking for to master when you are a fresh software developer. Don't focus so much on which specific business you're going for. The main thing is that you go into a company where you get to do what I call basic training, bootcamp training. Well, it's not a bootcamp like in the web or like as a learning platform. Bootcamp as military service. You're going to go for the basics, so you know how to clean your gun, read a map, sleep outside in horrible conditions, that sort of thing, right? That's bootcamp training for a military, for someone who wants to be a soldier. For you, it's building a basic CRUD application, usually, especially if you're doing web. Usually a monolithic CRUD application or something like that at some company, where all they really want you to do is, hey, there's an order, send an email to this person saying that their order has been completed, and do some processing and stuff like that with databases and all this good stuff, right? These are the boring, everyday boilerplate things that you should focus on in the beginning of things. At least 1 or 2 years you should be doing this. And it, as I said, it doesn't matter really which company or like which field of industry you're doing this in. The main thing is you get those basics, because that is at least 80% of what you need to master in order to be a good fit. And the way you pick a stack for that is very simple. As I said, go to the job postings, look at what seems to be relevant, and then pick a language that seems fun for you. If you want my perfect list, as I said, if you're going to be just completely professional about the whole thing, you want to be a solid backend developer, pick Java or C#. I can guarantee you basically that you're going to be able to get work at most countries in the entire world, because these are the standard, boring, quote-unquote, obvious choices for most corporations, and quite a lot, not just corporations, quite a lot of companies. There's tons of other stuff, of course, as well. If you want to be front-end, then Node, JavaScript, and TypeScript. These are the things that you usually do, because it's basically that or nothing for the average company. And if you want to be a full stack, pick both. I do Java development, I do C# development, I do TypeScript, etc., etc. But I've worked for a few years, so for me, like, switching between them, and I mean Scala and these more other sorts of languages, I've done those things as well. And I promise you guys, if you move around a little bit, you're going to see more than a few languages by the time you get to be old enough to retire from this whole thing. But in the beginning, as I said, just pick something that seems to fit your criteria for what you want to be able to do, and then go and look at the job postings. Because, as I've said 100 times before, you might love, say, Haskell and think that it's the coolest thing ever. That's great, but you're probably going to struggle a little bit if you want to use it for, you know, money purposes. If it's a side thing or something like that, like, it's sort of hireability, right? You think about it as being a craftsman or a businessman. The idea is that you should be able to actually make money, usually, from the fact that you know a programming language, to be a laborer or like a craftsman. And if you pick a set of tools that nobody works in and nobody wants you to build, or like then it doesn't really matter what you pick. Like, then just pick whatever is fun. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that you find a stack that you love and you commit to is that you try stuff out. That's what I've done. Like, I'll give you an example. I've tried tons of languages. I've fallen in love with them, and I followed out of love with them. To, like, right now, my big passion is C#, for example, because I think that the .NET movement and like everything related to it, like Microsoft has done a 180. They are used to not like to work with them due to their corporation-y way of doing things, and then they sort of changed, and now I think that that's pretty cool. Quite a lot of stuff that I want to do is possible there. But I mean, my big favorite language is still TypeScript. And I'm just very lucky, guys, that I don't have like a very strong need to, say, work with something that requires a niched language, such as if you were doing embedded, for example, or something where like it's very focused on one specific thing. I'm a little bit more of a generalist, and I do mostly web work, which means that I have quite a few choices that I can go with. And I just so happen to like the sort of languages that gives me that flexibility and freedom, which incidentally is also what most enterprises want. Most enterprises are looking for two things. They want a gigantic platform so they can feel like they can build anything they want, because those systems that they build, they're usually gigantic and they need a lot of libraries and different things and so forth and so forth. And the second thing is that it should be stable, like a good investment. Dependable and big. These are usually the two things that most corporations look for. And for me, who wants to just be able to build everything, C# fits that, or .NET Core and all of the stuff that happens right now very well fits with that, just as TypeScript fits that really well. But I also love Rust, etc. Like, there's tons of these things that you have to ask yourself of what do you actually want, because these choices might not be the best choices if you're going to do embedded, or if you're going to, say, do games development. Well, C# might be, but anywho. And then when it comes to domains, guys, and picking like an industry and stuff like that, pick what seems fun for you, but the most important thing is that you understand your ecosystem. Because once you have learned that first programming language, you have to spend at least a few years learning everything else around that programming language, because just having the programming language is usually not enough, especially not if you're doing web, because the web and everything related to building an enterprise system or a company, like a serious production application, it's bigger than just a language. It's an entire sphere of, like, an onion of other layers that build up the whole thing, right? And the best investment for you as a general career rule of thumb to do, the career strategy, is to add as many layers to that kernel, which is the language, as you can. That is the thing that's going to make you a very solid senior, regardless of which industry you pick. Have a great day.